Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. We've got some breaking news just now on the central economic policy of this Trump administration. In a huge blow to the White House and its agenda, and a big win, I would say, for everyone else, a federal appeals court has just ruled that Trump's sprawling tariffs are unlawful and invalid. Of course, the president has been obsessed with imposing his willy-nilly tariffs on Americans. In fact, it has been the central plank of his entire economic agenda. Now, it has been wildly unpopular. It's polling underwater. It is costing consumers and corporations billions and billions of dollars by the day. It's stopping the Fed from cutting interest rates by driving inflation. It has, on the whole, been really bad economic policy. And most of the discussion of these tariffs have been focused on that. But there's also something about these tariffs, which is that from the jump, they've been pretty clearly illegal. I mean, think about it for a second. Can the president just by himself create tariffs that raise hundreds of billions of dollars with zero congressional input? These tariffs are a violation of the law that they purport to use as the justification, and a violation of the spirit of the Constitution of a country which was quite literally founded on the belief the executive cannot unilaterally just impose a tax without representation, specifically tariffs. Now, the Trump administration has claimed that its tariff regime and the reciprocal tariffs that it has, and those on China and Mexico and Canada, that those are an emergency measure under a 1974 law, and that made it legal. Well, when this was challenged in a district court, the district court judge said, no way, this does not comport with the law. So the Department of Justice, acting as Trump's lawyers, appealed. And now, just 20 minutes ago, in a huge development, an appellate court has just upheld that ruling 7-4, the federal appellate circuit, saying it is illegal. All the tariffs you're citing are illegal. The emergency you claim is not a valid basis to break the law. Neil Katyal argued this case on behalf of the plaintiffs who just emerged victorious. He previously served as acting Solicitor General of the United States, and he joins me now. Neil, frame the argument that you made and what the court said about those arguments.
Yeah, so I want to begin, Chris, by saying, like you started by saying it's a blow to the President Trump. The way I really think of it is it's a win for the Constitution, and it's always, a very serious, sober thing when you challenge presidential action, and something you have to do really carefully. But when we looked at this, and I'm privileged to represent a number of small businesses, we looked at it and said, look, this just is way beyond the constitutional pale. And that's what the 7 judges today said on our nation's second highest court. They looked at it and said, the president under our Constitution is given no power to impose tariffs. Our founders expressly gave that to the Congress in Article 1, Section 8. And President Trump himself recognized that last time when he was president. He went and asked Congress for the authority to tariff, and they said no. So President Trump this time around just did it on his own. And what we said is you can't do that under the laws and Constitution of the United States. And that's what I'm glad to see the court reaffirm today.
Yeah, I thought this is an interesting phrasing. This is the federal circuit, which is an interesting and unique appellate circuit that deals with certain jurisdictions, including international trade. They talk about the 5 executive orders that impose tariffs and they say unlimited duration on nearly all goods from nearly every country in the world. Which I thought was, when you put it like that, you think to yourself, yeah, that does seem like a pretty broad claim of executive authority.
Yeah, as broad as it could get. And I think this is one thing that the judges were concerned about, and certainly we've been thinking about, which is the Trump administration is saying they want to bring this case to the Supreme Court. And this U.S. Supreme Court for many years has been saying, in particular with respect to a lot of different President Biden's initiatives, these questions are too major for the president alone to decide. They have to be done by the Congress. And here you got something as major as it gets. The Nonpartisan Tax Foundation says that these tariffs are the largest tax increase on Americans since Bill Clinton in 1993. And yet Congress had nothing to do with them. It's just President Trump and the stroke of his pen. And that just can't be the right way to run a constitutional system.
It's been interesting to cover this as we have, because so much is focused on the concrete effects. I mean, right now, if you're buying coffee, for instance, you notice that coffee's gotten very expensive. We don't grow a lot of coffee in the U.S. There's a little bit in Hawaii, but we import a huge amount of coffee. That coffee is being tariffed. So there's all sorts of effects. But The discourse didn't really talk about the legal foundation. The argument that they're making is that there's a 1974 act that allows them to declare an emergency under which they can impose these tariffs. But what's interesting about that act is it doesn't use the word tariff at all. It's entirely about sanctions on essentially countries that we have some geopolitical adversarial relationship with, right?
You're exactly right, Chris. You're doing excellent lawyering. I suspect it's in part due to your spouse, who's an amazing lawyer in her own right. But that's exactly right. The government is saying, in this case, the Trump administration is saying that in 1977, Congress passed a law that gave the president emergency economic powers. And the court today said, yeah, that's true. There's only one problem with that. That 1977 law says nothing whatsoever about tariffs. No president in the 50 years since that law was passed thought it had to do with tariffs. And as I said a moment ago, even Donald Trump didn't think it had to do with tariffs, because the first time around when he was president, he went to Congress to try and get the tariff authority that he's now asserting. And Congress said no. And I suspect, he's worried Congress would say no if he asks again, for all the reasons that you were explaining earlier.
One of the things here, and I want to read again from this decision here, that this is the sort of core of the holding. For the reasons discussed above, we discern no clear congressional authorization by IEEPA, that's the 1977 law for tariffs, of the magnitude of the reciprocal tariffs and the trafficking tariffs. Reading the phrase regulate importation, which is the statutory language they're citing, to include imposing these tariffs is a wafer-thin reed on which to rest such sweeping power. How confident were you about winning this case? I mean, you obviously had the lower court on your side, but also courts have been fairly deferential to presidential declarations of emergency powers.
Yeah, no, when you're challenging presidential action, if you're the president facing these challenges, you almost have to try to lose the case. It's like failing kindergarten. You got to try. But I think that's unfortunately where we were here. And that's why, I'm privileged not just to represent this myself, but with a whole group of very conservative folks. The Liberty Justice Center is the entity behind this, a libertarian organization. Judge Michael McConnell, a very prominent former judge, very conservative. It's not, this is, when you get to something like this, Chris, the Constitution is not political. It's a bipartisan document that speaks to all of us, and it sets certain ground rules. And one of those ground rules was enforced today. The idea that the president on his own can't tax the American people. That's what King George III tried to do. We had a revolution about that.
Yeah, final question for you. I think this is probably, we're not at the Supreme Court yet, but probably the most significant ruling in restraining assertions of power from this president since what happened with Abrego Garcia, which did go up to the Supreme Court. The big question is, how confident are you? The Supreme Court's almost certainly going to take this up. How confident are you there?
So I'm very confident in the merits of our argument, Chris. I think it is, rock solid, extremely strong. And I know that there's sometimes some in the public who say, well, this is a court that's dominated by Republican appointees and the like, and you can never get a, liberal victory or something. And I have two things to say that. Number one, this isn't a liberal victory. This is a victory for the rule of law that conservatives and liberals should celebrate alike. And number two, the court has shown time and again that it can reach conclusions that are at odds with conservative ideology when the law says so. And, when I argued Moore versus Harper, and we talked about that a couple of years ago, is a good example. So I think let's let, the process play out. Our hope is that the administration doesn't appeal this, that they go to Congress and ask for the authority that the court says. That's what the Constitution says they should be doing. But if they do decide to appeal it, we will be ready at the U.S. Supreme Court for them.
Stephen Miller just posting on social media, the judicial coup is out of control. Those are his words, presumably in response to this. Neil, thank you so much. This was a last second coming to join us in this breaking news. I really, really do appreciate it. Have a great weekend.
Thank you as well.
Josh Marshall is the founder and editor-in-chief of Talking Points Memo. Paul Butler is a former federal prosecutor who teaches law at Georgetown University. Ankush Khuduri is also served in the Department of Justice, now a senior writer for Political Magazine. They join me now. Josh, I'm going to go to you first. This is a huge deal. I mean, again, like I just said, I think with the exception of the Abrego Garcia ruling, this is as high a court dealing as much a blow to lawless assertions of presidential power in this Trump term as we've seen?
Yeah, it's you said that it's almost his entire economic policy. It's almost his entire presidency. Like it's almost hard to imagine these tariffs no longer being in effect, because other than Jeanine Pirro being U.S. Attorney for D.C., what else is there? Now, obviously, you've got this like reign of terror for not only undocumented immigrants around the country and also a lot of U.S. citizens, but I mean it is so central. And the other guests are lawyers, but this was always so just out of anything that was remotely lawful. I mean, the Congress actually does have some laws that delegates a fair amount of tariff authority to presidents about dumping and stuff like that. So the Congress has, I think, wrongly deferred a lot. But there was just no basis of any of this. And I do think going forward, if there is a non-authoritarian forward for the United States, we have to think about how it is exactly that something with so little legal basis has been going on totally unchecked for 8 months now, and that's a big question in itself.
That's a great point about the pace of the law. One of the things I think we've seen really in the Trump years, more than any other time, is like there's what the law says, and then there's how quickly or slowly the courts move to say it. There's hundreds of billions of dollars of tariff revenue that's been collected illegally, according to an appeals court today. There was a filing by the Treasury Secretary that said basically, boy, it'd be pretty embarrassing for us if you were to knock this one down. We've been sitting here collecting these tariffs. Like, what's your reaction to this decision coming down, but coming down, as Josh mentioned, months after the whole thing went into effect?
I can't wait to see how the Supreme Court responds. And I wish I was as optimistic as my colleague Neil that the court will do the right thing by following the law and upholding this important order. But it's based on Trump's declaration of an emergency. And Chris, we've seen the Supreme Court defer time and time again. He declared a national emergency and used that as an excuse to suspend due process rights for people who he wants to deport. Here in the District of Columbia, he declared an emergency on crime, and now we've got national troops and federal police officers all over town. And the court has been sympathetic and said many times, while this case is winding its way through the courts, while this issue is being decided by the trial court, appellate court, and then us, President Trump, you can do what you want to do.
Yeah, that's the question, Ankush, is do they do this thing they've been doing with a lot of these, which is without a decision, without weighing in, without even justification, saying, for now, keep at it, buddy. We'll get around to it when we get around to it. We're not deciding on the merits. Or, to Neil's point, I mean, one of the things that's so striking here is the ideological core of this is pretty cross-pressured. In fact, I think if anything, it's kind of conservative, which is to say, the conservatives on the court are huge enthusiasts of executive power and the unitary executive, but not necessarily unilaterally ability to slap hundreds of billions of dollars of taxes on the American people without congressional input.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, actually, the arguments have always been quite strong from a conservative jurisprudential position from the very beginning. I will just say, you guys talked a little about the delay. One of the reasons this took too long, in my estimation, is because major business groups were afraid, I think, to challenge the first waves of tariffs. So this litigation kicked off much later than it should have. With respect to the Supreme Court and how they'll approach this, Neil Katyal is doing the right thing by expressing confidence in the Supreme Court, given what his role is. But Paul, I think, is right here. We should maintain a healthy level of skepticism. The one data point I like to remind people of whenever they sort of question how committed the Republican appointees are to their methodological commitments is the Trump immunity decision from a little over a year ago. And the conservatives claim to be textualists and originalists, yet they issued a ruling that has no basis in the text of the Constitution and no credible basis in the country's history or the framers' expectations when they wrote the Constitution. So anything with these folks, I got to say, is kind of within the realm of possibility. On the merits, though, it is strong.
Yeah, and part of this gets to, now, I have not read, the opinion just came down. I literally read the first 20 pages as I wolf them down. I don't think, to the point that you're making, Paul, about emergencies, I don't think the court reaches the question of whether the emergencies are valid. I think what they're saying is, even if we stipulate there's an emergency such that you say, it doesn't provide the ability to do what you want to do, right? So I don't think they're saying your emergency is BS. But, Josh, and I'll go to Paul and then Ankush on this question, one of the confounding things we face here is the problem of bad faith, obviously pretextual declarations by Trump, right? This is a real problem. Lisa Cook, we're firing her for cause because of mortgage fraud. BS. And we all know that's a lie. We are declaring an emergency because Canada, our vaunted enemy, is trafficking too much fentanyl. No, that's not, and this is really a problem. It's an abuse of the law that courts are very reluctant to basically call BS on an executive declaring a thing, whatever it is, despite it being obviously pretextual to anyone who's awake and breathing.
Yeah, and who's that for?
That's for you, Josh. Yeah,
I believe that's to you. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, no, we've had this from the beginning, and there, I think it shows that all the other branches and all the other parties, there being one, have really not come up to speed with how you deal with this situation, because most of the, everybody but Trump in this drama is still in a 70s, 80s, maybe 1990s mode where, you do X, we do Y, and we're all kind of thinking we're basically operating in what we a good faith understanding of what the relative powers are and stuff like that. But clearly Trump isn't. And we see the results. And I think the point is really on the mark. There is the Trump is getting a big benefit from his retaliatory campaign because the litigants who would come forward and press this are not coming forward. Right. That is a key point of it. But we have an entire system. And look, we had the same thing with what the court did on birthright citizenship. Kind of like, oh, we'll let a whole generation of people, not citizens, be deprived of their citizenship while it works its way through. We don't have a way where the other branches, at least the judicial branch, can come forward and say, we are going to move right now because this is plainly unconstitutional and the damage is irreversible. Yeah. Well, I mean, we're a year into a new global economic order based on something that was just flatly illegal.
Paul, what do you think about? I mean, the one thought I had about it is if the court rules it illegal, did the people get their money back? Does the country? No, I mean, just a genuine question. If there's hundreds of billions of dollars of illegally collected tariffs, what do you do with that?
So that comes under what lawyers call remedies, and that's something the law is actually pretty good at figuring out. What the law isn't as good as figuring out is something that you mentioned a moment ago, Chris, and that's the problem of pretext. So today in a courthouse in the District of Columbia, we had this extraordinary hearing where the Trump administration was pretending like the reason it wants to get rid of Governor Lisa Cook on the Federal Reserve was for some petty stuff about mortgages that she hasn't been charged with any crime. There isn't so far evidence to support what the administration is saying. And they're saying, oh, well, she can't be on the board because she may have done something that she wasn't supposed to do. Well, everybody knows what the real agenda is. Everybody knows it because for a long time, Trump was trying to get rid of the chair of the Federal Reserve. And when he found that the law just didn't allow him to do that, he turned his attention to Governor Cook. Apparently, he's got this guy running the agency that's responsible for mortgages, who's happy to look and see what he can find. So he looked to see what he could find about Congressman Schiff, about Letitia James, and now, voila, Lisa Cook. And that supposedly is why she can't be on the board. But really, Trump wants to exert his heavy hand on the feds, just like he has on every other apparatus of government.
The big question, Ankush, is this precedential one. If you're worried about precedent and you're conservative, you think to yourself, do I want to give a Democrat this power? Raise hundreds of billions of dollars in taxes when they want to. But also, if you don't care about precedent, you think to yourself, well, we'll just strike it down if they do it, which is sort of the problem we have right now with this court.
Yeah, no, you're correct. I mean, that should be a concern to the Supreme Court, that if you give a tool to President Trump, other successive presidents may get it. But you're right also. It's not clear that they would extend the same sweep of authority to presidents from another party. And I will just say, you know, the question of pretext is a very important one, because it's been going on for months, actually, right? With courts chastising lawyers, particularly in the lower courts, Justice Department lawyers saying what you said is not true. Whatever. I'm talking like this is a broader question about the executive branch and its approach to candor with the public and with the courts. And I would have hoped that the Supreme Court would take some notice of this, but it doesn't seem like they have. One last thing I'd say with respect to the refunds on the tariffs are paid by the importers. So if there is relief that flows from the decision, I think it would go to the importers. We do not have tax bills, you and I. So this is going to be a problem there.
Josh Marshall, Paul Butler, Ankush Khardori, thank you so much on a wild news day. Coming up, Donald Trump has now responded to tonight's massive ruling. He's not happy. By the way, correction on what I said earlier. Stephen Miller's post about the judicial coup was back in May when that lower court, which is International Trade Court, first ruled against the administration. But we're going to tell you what the president said and also get reaction from Senator Michael Bennet of Colorado next. Donald Trump has posted a response to the big news that his tariffs have been ruled illegal by a federal appellate court, saying all tariffs are still in effect, which I have to say is true. The court has stayed the implementation of the ruling until October to give him time to appeal to the Supreme Court. Today, a highly partisan appeals court incorrectly said our tariffs should be removed, but they know the United States of America will win in the end. If these tariffs ever went away, it would be a total disaster for the country. A lot more like that. We're no longer going to tolerate these enormous deficits. You know, the country would literally die, I think he says, something like that. It undermines our manufacturers, farmers, and everyone else. If allowed to stand, this decision would literally destroy, that's what he says, literally destroy the United States of America. At the start of this Labor Day weekend, we should all remember tariffs are the best tool to help our capital W workers and support our capital C companies that produce great made in America products. On and on and on. We've been screwed over, blah, blah, blah. And then, of course, thank you for your attention to this matter. Senator Michael Bennet is a Democrat of Colorado who grilled Secretary Kennedy during his confirmation hearing. We're going to talk about that in a second before the Senate Finance Committee, and he joins me now. Senator, let me just start with your reaction to the appellate court striking down hundreds of billions of dollars in taxes.
My reaction, Chris, is that there are small businesses all over Colorado and medium-sized businesses that have been in a misery ever since Donald Trump put these unconstitutional or illegal tariffs on place. They felt like they had just recovered from the misery of having their supply chains blown up by COVID, only to have the blown up supply chain, and they had restored those supply chains much to, their hard work and their ingenuity and their tenacity. And then Donald Trump blew up their supply chains again with his ridiculous non-strategic tariffs that have no end in sight. So I think on the one hand, they're going to be relieved to know that a president shouldn't be able to do this unilaterally. On the other hand, they're going to be worried about the continuing uncertainty as President Trump continues to litigate these things.
Senator, can you hear me now?
I can.
Okay, good. The follow-up question for you is, how much do you hear about these tariffs from the people you represent? I think it's one of these things where, from the consumer end, you can sense when things are going up in price. I mentioned coffee before, but there's a whole bunch of other things. But it's hidden from the consumer. It doesn't say on your receipt. But for folks that are working in small businesses, right, they are actually seeing it on the line item.
I hear about it everywhere I go, and it truly, we overuse the word existential, I think, but it is existential for small business owners in Salida that are the guys that invented, the surfboard for rivers that's so unbelievable that people come from all over to try to get it. They've now been totally disrupted. Our steel mill, which is not actually that small a company, has been disrupted. The folks that are milling wheat in Colorado have been disrupted, and the list is very, very long. So I hear about it all the time. And maybe actually that's why, Chris, there's been some bipartisan interest in the Senate to try to restrain this trade policy by saying that if you, Donald Trump, impose these unilateral tariffs, you need to come back to Congress and get a bipartisan approval for what you've done, or they fall. The court seems to have agreed that Congress has an important role to play here.
You had a few intense exchanges, as I mentioned earlier, with the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., at his confirmation hearing. You voted against his confirmation. What is your reaction to what has played out over the last 24, 48 hours, both with the decision to restrict the COVID vaccine, an upcoming meeting on vaccine schedules that is now clouded with uncertainty, and mass resignations and a firing at the Centers for Disease Control?
I mean, I think it tells you what happens when you have mass conspiracy leavened with complete abject incompetence. And that's what I thought we were going to get with Bobby Kennedy, and that is what we've gotten. Unfortunately, you know, what's happening is real people and their kids are going to suffer as a result of the misinformation that he's providing. Real people are going to suffer as the cost of their vaccines goes up because folks like, you know, that are well-known chain grocery stores or drugstores around the country are trying to respond to the complete incoherence of Bobby Kennedy's vaccine policy. This is another place where they are just burdening working people with an ideology that is, in Bobby Kennedy's case, just absolutely incoherent.
Yeah, that point about the delay in vaccines, I've been hearing, you know, CVS, there's 19 states, I think, right now where you can't get them. There's other drug stores where there's sort of a backup. I thought this was interesting. This Eric Erickson, who's a, you know, right-wing commentator, saying, my wife has stage 4 lung cancer, which is upsetting and difficult. She's one of the people the COVID vaccine actually helps. Thanks to the current mess at HHS, CVS is unable to get her the vaccine. This is a real problem right now.
It's a real problem. And if it's your wife, if it's your grandmother, if it's your kid, you don't have time for this to be debated on the cable television. With all respect to everybody, you need this solved and you need the uncertainty to go away. I've yet to have a conversation with anybody in Colorado that thinks it's a good idea to destroy the CDC or decapitate it. I have not met a single person in Colorado in this fire season that thinks it's a good idea to be dismantling the Forest Service in the way that, you know, Donald Trump has threatened to do. This is stuff that on the ground just isn't making sense to people. And I want to say again on the tariffs that it's really important for your viewers to hear that we do hear about it all the time and that there's nothing speculative about it. It is affecting people's ability to keep their family businesses alive and their family aspirations alive. And Donald Trump has really been a wrecking ball when it comes to that.
Senator Michael Bennet of the state of Colorado, thank you for making some time to debate something on cable news. We do what we can.
Come, and I know, come to Colorado. We'll do it here.
Sounds
again.
Good. We'll be right back. Congressman Robert Garcia, Democrat of California, is the ranking member of the Oversight Committee, and he joins me now to discuss the breaking news that we just got that a federal appeals court has struck down what would be hundreds of billions of dollars of tariffs that have been levied against almost every nation on earth indefinitely. Congressman, your reaction to this major ruling?
Look, this is actually a great day for American business, small business owners, for workers. What we were really talking about was a massive tax increase, as we know, on small businesses across the country. I represent the Port of Long Beach. It's the second largest seaport in the United States, and the tariffs were causing major harm to trade and to the economy across the country. And so this is a great ruling by the court. Of course, Donald Trump is already overreacting, saying this is going to somehow be the destruction of the United States. I'm not sure if he's aware. He's trying to do that all on his own. I mean, he's trying to destroy the country and the economy by his actions. And so this is a very good ruling. Very hopeful. I never try to put too much stock into what the Supreme Court will eventually do, but a really good day, actually, for the economy and for workers.
You know, one of the things that's been so striking about this is that the tariff authority is explicitly given to Congress in the Constitution. It contemplates this. This is not some it's not one of these questions that comes before a court, which is like, what did the founders think about AI? Like, we know what they thought about tariffs. It was very front of mind. They were very explicit. This is a congressional prerogative. Your colleagues don't seem to care much one way or the other about the fact that this power, which should be theirs, specifically the House majority and Mike Johnson and his caucus, it should be theirs. They can pass things on party line votes, and has been taken away from them.
I mean, the House majority and Mike Johnson could care less about their own principles or constituents. What they care about is doing whatever Donald Trump tells them to do. I mean, they could care less about their own power, the separation of powers, legislative authority. They are there to please Donald Trump and to do whatever he tells them to do. And so whether it's issues around tariffs, whether it's giving up their own authority over checks and balances, certainly around the budget, it's just another example of them bending the knee to whatever Donald Trump wants him to do. But this decision is a very good sign that the courts continue to push back on some of the worst that Donald Trump is trying to do. And as it relates to tariffs, I mean, this has been the most chaotic economic trade policy we've ever seen an American president actually have. He's changed his tariff policy over 100 times. Countries our allies around the world have no idea what's going on. It's one tariff policy one day, it's different the next. And so I'm glad that the court stepped in. And of course, I think all of us are going to watch what happens in the Supreme Court.
Well, one of the big funding fights that's about to be queued up, I mean, you already have, if I'm not mistaken, I think there's basically hundreds of billions of dollars that have been appropriated and not spent. They're now saying that they are just going to essentially kind of requisition $5 billion of authorized congressional funding. This is Russ Vought at the Office of Management and Budget, to kind of tee up a constitutional question before the court, which is they say the president gets to unilaterally decide how much of the money that you and Congress appropriate they get to spend.
I mean, we are going to fight like damn hell on this one. Give me a break. We're going to appropriate funds for programs, and now Donald Trump gets to pick and choose what he actually funds, and then somehow take whatever is not spent and then give it back, spend it on different programs. That's not the way the budgeting process works in this country, and it's certainly not the way the founders had set this up as it relates to separation of powers. And so I cannot believe that Mike Johnson and Republicans are going to allow the president of the United States now to essentially control the power of Congress as it relates to budgeting. And so this is gearing up for a major fight in the Congress. Democrats, and I've already been talking to a few, in no scenario should we give a freaking inch to Donald Trump and Republicans on this issue. We appropriate the funds in Congress. The fact that he wants to just change this completely as a matter of precedent is crazy. And so we've got to be very clear, and we've got to be tough. As this budget negotiation, as we all know, ends in these next 30 days, we've got to stand tall and tough.
Final question for you. I think the strategy to get through the Epstein mess, the Epstein files, which it's been reported Donald Trump is in, that his Department of Justice did not want to release, that the Congress did not want to vote on, their House Republicans. Mike Johnson sent everyone home early, that by sending everyone home early, everyone would forget about it. You'll come back in the fall and people will say, Jeffrey Epstein who? Do you think that's going to work?
Absolutely not. This upcoming week, we have actually many of the victims of Jeffrey Epstein coming to Capitol Hill. We're meeting with them. They're talking to lawmakers. We're going to highlight their stories. We've got to center these victims. And I'll just say one other piece of news that actually just developed in the last couple hours is we finally got word from the Epstein estate. They're going to be providing the actual Epstein book, that famous book where that note that Donald Trump drew and doodled to Jeffrey Epstein, his so-called best friend of 10 to 15 years. The Epstein estate is actually going to now get us that book and a bunch of other documents that they have that's actually not been reported yet, reporting it here for the first time. We're going to get those documents as we understand it now on September the 8th. And so that will continue our investigation. And again, we ask the question, where are the rest of the documents? What is Pam Bondi hiding? What is Donald Trump hiding? End the cover-up. Let's get to the truth.
That reporting in the Wall Street Journal about the sketch of a naked woman and an imagined dialogue between him and Jeffrey Epstein about how some things never age and may everyone be another secret. Donald Trump called that fake news and then sued the Wall Street Journal and Rupert Murdoch, I think, for like $1 billion. So if the estate turns it over, that would seem to me to kind of resolve any outstanding questions. So we'll look at that anxiously. Congressman Robert Garcia, thank you very much. Still to come, Donald Trump's toadies are finding new ways to kiss the ring. Next. Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. Well, Donald Trump got some bad news to start off this holiday weekend. The American economy and the rule of law got some good news. Just a couple hours ago, the nation's second highest court, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit, one of the appellate courts, found that most of Trump's global tariffs are illegal, like unlawful, can't do them. That was upholding a ruling from a lower trade court arguing that the flimsy justification Trump used to unilaterally place tariffs on almost every country in the entire world indefinitely just doesn't hold water, at least until the Supreme Court weighs in. Trump world, not surprisingly, not very happy with how things turned out. Top cabinet officials, including Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, all submitted statements to the court in support of the tariffs. Bloomberg reporting, quote, Trump cabinet officials told the court that ruling the president's global tariffs illegal would seriously harm U.S. foreign policy, with Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent warning of dangerous diplomatic embarrassment. I would argue the best way to avoid such embarrassment is not to just start a ridiculous, unnecessary trade war with the entire world in the first place based on specious statutory interpretation, especially trade wars founded on incredibly shoddy legal logic. Today, Donald Trump is trying to sort of talk a big game. He's writing on social media in the last hour, quote, today a highly partisan appeals court incorrectly said our tariffs should be removed, but they know the United States of America will win in the end. Adding, quote, now with the help of the United States Supreme Court, we will use tariffs to benefit of our nation and make America rich, strong, and powerful again. Thank you for your attention to this matter. He was a bit more apocalyptic in his rhetoric 3 weeks ago when he was posting about the possibility of the courts ruling against him. Quote, tariffs are having a huge positive impact on the stock market. Almost every day, new records are set. In addition, hundreds of billions of dollars are pouring into our country's coffers. If a radical left court ruled against us at this late date in an attempt to bring down or disturb the largest amount of money, wealth creation, influence the USA has ever seen, it would be impossible to ever recover or pay back these massive sums of money and honor. It would be 1929 all over again, a Great Depression. Adding, quote, there is no way America could recover from such a judicial tragedy, but I know our court system, capital C, capital S, better than anyone. There is no one in history that has gone through the trials, tribulations, and uncertainties such as I, and absolutely terrible, but also amazing, beautiful things can happen. Wow. He's got a lot to say. Beautiful things can happen, but I don't think the president's going to see today's ruling that way. One person who does see it as a big win for our country is former acting Solicitor General Neil Katyal, who argued the case in court. I spoke to him about it just last hour.
When you're challenging presidential action, if you're the president facing these challenges, you almost have to try to lose the case. It's like failing kindergarten. You got to try. But I think that's unfortunately where we were here. When you get to something like this, Chris, the Constitution is not political. It's a bipartisan document that speaks to all of us, and it sets certain ground rules. And one of those ground rules was enforced today. The idea that the president on his own can't tax the American people. That's what King George III tried to do. We had a revolution about that.
Norm Eisen has repeatedly fought Donald Trump in court and won. He's the co-founder and executive chair of the Democracy Defenders Fund. He previously served as special counsel for ethics and government reform under President Obama, and he joins me now. Norm, you've been a party arguing a bunch of lawsuits, many of which have been victorious, challenging all sorts of assertions of executive power across the board. Your reaction to this big win, I think, for the basic rule of law and Constitution in terms of Trump's tariffs?
Well, Chris, at Democracy Defenders Fund, we've handled over 125 legal matters, including filing a brief from conservatives, every administration from Nixon to Trump 1, saying, of course, the law that Donald Trump was using doesn't talk about tariffs. It's not used for tariffs. It's not relevant to tariffs. And the Federal Circuit agreed with us and the litigants. Donald Trump makes it too easy on us sometimes, Chris, because he takes outrageous, outlandish positions. He's done that again with the tariffs. We'll see what happens in the United States Supreme Court. But if the rule of law prevails, he'll lose there just as he did on his way to the Supreme Court.
You know, there's been a real divide, right, between what lower courts and even appellate courts have found and stopped and what the Supreme Court has permitted. And often the Supreme Court's permissiveness hasn't actually been in decisions on the merits. They've been in temporary orders, sometimes unsigned, sometimes unwritten, that basically say, yeah, he can keep doing what he's doing and we'll maybe get around to it. What does that mean for the status of the rule of law when he's lost so many lower court cases where they have to adhere to precedent, and yet the Supreme Court seems more and more reluctant to stand in his way?
Well, Chris, I've litigated many of them, so I've seen the reasoning up close, and it is impeccable. And even the Roberts MAGA tribunal, that MAGA majority up there, often doesn't dare to explain why they're stopping those decisions. Now, the good news is that affects just about 10% of the total number of cases. Over 200 times lower courts and appellate courts have stopped Donald Trump. So it's a smaller quantum of cases that they're messing with. And then even when they do that, we found in some of our cases, they'll provide a little bit of a roadmap where we go right back to court the next day. Birthright citizenship. They said you have to have a class action. Chris, at Democracy Defenders Fund, with our wonderful partners, we had that class action on file in 2 hours. We got the class certified less than 2 weeks. We got another preliminary injunction, and Donald Trump and his DOJ haven't dared to appeal because they know they'll lose on that issue when it gets to the Supreme Court. So we have to run a little harder. It's an uphill battle. You got to pump your legs a little harder, but you can still win despite this Roberts MAGA majority.
There's sort of different categories of what I would call sort of executive authority abuses. In some cases, it's just been flatly illegal, right? Just ignoring the law. I mean, for instance, there's a legal process that created a commission that removed a portrait of he was a colonel in the U.S. Army, a general in the Confederate one, General Robert E. Lee, from the Pentagon. That was pursuant to the law. The president says he's going to put it back up. There's a bunch of stuff he does that's facially unlawful. Then there's stuff that seem abuses of authority that is granted to him. Like today, for instance, news that he is rescinding the Secret Service protections of the former Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris, which seems to me like, yes, I think he can do it lawfully. How should we think about executive power now, 8 months into this, where these abuses have so run the gamut from the clearly illegal to the maybe legal but indefensible?
Chris, it does fall in multiple categories where you have, even when he loses in court, he pushes the envelope. We're litigating the Voice of America case. We had an order to show cause hearing for contempt because he didn't abide by the judge's instructions, which was not appealed, by the way, to keep Voice of America on the air. So you have that. And then you have a birthright citizenship as another example. The Constitution very clearly says all babies born here are citizens. He's tearing up the Constitution. Then you get on a slippery slope. There's a middle ground, these retaliatory criminal investigations, Tish James, Adam Schiff, the John Bolton raid. There's so many other examples of that. And then you arrive at the end of that terminus at lawful but awful, like yanking the former vice president's Secret Service detail. She'll be able to make adjustments and to arrange for private security. But it stinks, Chris. And you know who agrees with me? The American people. Part of this miasma of Donald Trump's disdain for the rule of law, which is what makes us America. This is the theme that runs through all 125 or so of our legal matters at Democracy Defenders Fund. The American people don't like it. They like the Constitution. They like the laws. And so Donald Trump has these historic low approval ratings for anybody not named Trump. Because in part of his disdain for the rule of law. There's also the corruption and much more. And then he's hitting them in the pocketbook with the tariffs and the big brutal betrayal bill. So it's a cocktail of poison, and the American people are spitting it out.